Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into something pretty mind-bending today, the idea that our assumptions can actually shape our reality. And we've got some incredible source material about, well, Nikola Tesla.
Tesla, yeah.
But we're not just talking about his inventions this time.
Right.
We're looking at him as someone who deeply understood the power of the mind, almost like a mystic in a lab coat.
It's true. And, he seemed to intuitively grasp these principles that we're only now beginning to understand scientifically, like in quantum physics, where the observer actually plays a role in shaping reality.
Exactly. And this isn't some vague New Age concept. Our sources get into specific examples, and honestly, some of them are pretty wild.
Oh, I know.
Like, did you know that Tesla would visualize his inventions
Oh, yeah.
down to the tiniest detail
It's amazing.
before even sketching them out?
No.
And it wasn't just a general idea.
Yeah.
It was a complete working model
In his mind.
in his mind.
Yeah. It's an incredible feat of mental discipline, but what's even more interesting is how it connects to this idea of assumptions shaping reality. Like, imagine the level of certainty he must have cultivated to hold that entire invention in his mind with absolute clarity before it even physically existed.
Right. That's a powerful assumption.
It is.
So, okay, let's break this down for our listeners. The core idea here is that our assumptions, those deeply ingrained beliefs that we often don't even question, can actually influence our experiences. But how does that actually work? Is it just wishful thinking, or is there something more fundamental going on?
Well, our sources point to this principle that's almost like a universal law, and it's actually beautifully illustrated by this analogy of a crystal forming.
Okay.
So you start with a single molecule, which on its own is pretty insignificant.
Right.
But when that molecular structure is repeated over and over, you get a solid, tangible crystal.
I see where you're going with this.
And our thoughts, particularly of those repeated assumptions, are kind of like those molecules, building the reality that we experience.
So it goes way beyond just like positive thinking then.
Oh, yeah.
And it actually makes me think of that famous Tesla quote. If you want to understand the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. But what does that actually mean in this context?
Okay, so think of it this way. Everything in the universe, including our thoughts, has a vibrational frequency. Tesla understood this deeply in his work with, electricity and magnetism, right? So apply that same principle to our thoughts and beliefs. If we're constantly emitting this frequency of, let's say, doubt or fear, that's going to interact with the world in a certain way.
Makes sense.
But if we can shift our frequency to one of confidence and expectation, well, the results can be dramatically different.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also raises a question for me. If our thoughts have this kind of power, why do we often experience things that seem completely out of our control?
That's where it gets really fascinating, and our sources actually use some pretty vivid examples to illustrate how two people can have completely different experiences in the same situation based on their assumptions.
Okay, give me an example.
Okay, so imagine two people facing, let's say, a financial setback. One person might see it as a complete disaster, like a confirmation of their belief that they'll never get ahead. The other person might see it as a temporary challenge, an opportunity to learn and grow.
I could see how that would play out so differently.
Yeah, their assumptions are literally creating two very different realities.
So it's not just about attracting good things, it's about how we interpret and respond to whatever life throws at us.
Exactly. And that's where concepts like confirmation bias and self-fulfilling prophecies come into play. Our minds are incredibly good at filtering information to confirm what we already believe, and our actions often unconsciously create the outcomes that we expect, even if those expectations are negative.
So, say I'm buying into this idea that my assumptions are shaping my reality. How do I actually start changing those deep-seated beliefs that might be holding me back?
Well, that's where our sources get really practical, and they outline this two-step process that anyone can use.
I like practical.
But before we jump into that, I think it's helpful to understand more about how Tesla actually applied these principles in his own life. Remember how we talked about him visualizing his inventions? Well, there's more to it than just picturing the final product.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Okay, so Tesla, he had this system, right? He would first conceive the idea for an invention, and then, get this, he would build it completely in his mind.
Wow.
He'd mentally run it, test it, refine it, all within the laboratory of his imagination.
Oh.
It wasn't just visualizing a static image, he was experiencing the invention.
Oh, wow.
In this dynamic, almost interactive way.
So he wasn't just seeing it, he was feeling it.
Yes.
Like a virtual reality experience, but in his mind.
Precisely. And what's remarkable is that when he finally built these inventions in the physical world, they worked almost flawlessly, just as he'd envisioned them. It's almost like he was tapping into a blueprint that already existed, shaping reality through the sheer force of his focused assumptions.
Okay, so that's where I get tripped up a little bit. It sounds amazing, but how do we know it wasn't just like his genius at work?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe he was just exceptionally good at engineering and problem solving.
That's a valid point. And of course, Tesla's brilliance is undeniable. But what's interesting is that this idea of mental creation, it's not unique to him. We see it echoed in the practices of high-performing athletes who use visualization to improve their game, or artists who mentally rehearse their performances before taking the stage.
Right.
There's a growing body of evidence suggesting that this kind of focused mental activity can actually influence physical outcomes.
So it's not just about picturing something, it's about mentally engaging with it, almost like a dress rehearsal for reality.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that two-step process for changing our assumptions.
Why?
The first step, as we mentioned, is awareness. It's about shining a light on those subconscious beliefs that are kind of running the show behind the scenes.
Okay, but how do we actually become aware of something that's, by definition, beneath our conscious awareness?
Well, it takes a bit of introspection, right? Our sources suggest techniques like journaling, where you actually take the time to examine your recurring thoughts and beliefs. What are the stories you're telling yourself, about your abilities, about the world? Are those stories empowering you, or are they limiting you in some way?
I see, yeah. But that sounds like it could get pretty heavy, dwelling on all the negative stuff.
It can be challenging, for sure. But the key is to approach it with this sense of curiosity and self-compassion, not judgment. Just observe those thoughts and ask yourself, is this really true? Where did this belief come from? Is it serving me?
That's good advice, yeah.
Yeah.
And what about the second step? Once I've identified those limiting assumptions, how do I actually change them?
That's where conscious choice comes in. Once you're aware of a belief that's no longer serving you, you can actively choose to replace it with a more empowering one. This is where affirmations can be really helpful.
Oh, okay.
Repeating positive statements that reflect the reality you want to create.
So instead of thinking I'm not good at public speaking, I would say I am a confident and engaging speaker.
Precisely. And it's not just about the words, it's about embodying that new belief. Visualization can play a role here too. Imagine yourself speaking with confidence and ease, feeling that positive response from the audience. The key is to create this vivid mental experience that reinforces that new assumption.
It's like we're rewiring our brains to operate on a different frequency, like you were talking about earlier. But I imagine it takes a lot of effort to overcome those deeply ingrained patterns.
It does. Our sources emphasize that this isn't some quick fix, right? It takes time, it takes consistency, and a willingness to challenge those old thought patterns when they inevitably resurface. It's like building a new muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it becomes.
Right, so we've got awareness and conscious choice. Are there any other strategies that can help us kind of solidify these new assumptions?
Yeah, the sources highlight the importance of our environment and the people that we surround ourselves with.
Okay.
If you're constantly exposed to negativity and limiting beliefs, it's going to be much harder to maintain those new empowering thoughts.
That makes sense.
So curating your social circle, being mindful of the media that you consume, even creating a physical space that inspires and uplifts you, those can make a huge difference.
It's like we're creating this reality bubble that supports those new assumptions we're trying to cultivate. I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together, but there's one thing that's still nagging at me. What are those times when we put in the work, we're diligently changing our assumptions, but we don't see any tangible results in our lives?
That's a really common experience, and it actually leads us to another important concept our sources discuss: the delay factor.
Okay, tell me more about that. Okay, so we've been on quite a journey with this whole idea of our assumptions shaping our reality, and especially with Nikola Tesla as like our guide.
He's a good one to have, right?
I mean, he really is. It's a lot to take in, though, so I'd love to pull out some key takeaways for our listeners, something they can really hold on to.
Yeah, for me, it always comes back to that shift from feeling like we're just at the mercy of fate, to realizing that we might actually have way more influence than we think.
Right. It's not about pretending that life is always easy.
No.
But about recognizing that we're not just like passive passengers, we're active participants.
We are co-creating our experiences.
Yeah, it's like we've been handed the steering wheel and now we're finally figuring out how to use it.
Exactly. And those assumptions we've been talking about, they're like the navigation system, but sometimes the map is outdated, right? leading us in circles.
That's a great analogy.
That's why that awareness piece is so crucial. We need to examine those deeply held beliefs, the ones we often don't even question.
No.
Are they guiding us towards where we truly want to go?
Speaking of guidance, I loved that two-step process that our sources outlined. First, becoming aware of those hidden assumptions, and then consciously choosing new ones that are more aligned with the reality we want to create.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff. But
Yeah.
it does require effort, I think that analogy of upgrading our mental software is so spot on.
Yeah.
We're literally rewiring our brains to operate on a different frequency, one that's more in tune with our goals and aspirations.
But like you mentioned earlier, it's not a one-time upgrade.
No.
It's this ongoing process
Of maintenance.
of maintenance, yeah, and refinement.
Those old thought patterns, the ones that keep telling us we're not good enough or we'll never succeed, man, they are stubborn.
They are.
They tend to creep back in when we least expect them.
Absolutely. So it's not about achieving some perfect state of unwavering positivity.
No way.
It's about learning to manage our minds.
Yeah, to become the master of our thoughts rather than the slave to them.
Right. And remember, we don't have to do this alone.
We don't. Our sources emphasize how important it is to surround ourselves with supportive people.
Right.
Those who uplift and inspire us, who reflect back to us the best version of ourselves,
That's so important.
And it's equally important to be mindful of the information we consume. Books, podcasts, social media, it's all input, right?
It is.
Is it feeding our minds with negativity and doubt? Or is it fueling our growth and expansion?
It's a good point. And this actually reminds me of the Tesla challenge that our sources proposed,
Yeah.
where we test this principle out
Yeah.
by assuming something positive will happen.
Like getting good news or a compliment.
Have you ever tried this yourself?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I've honestly been surprised by how often those seemingly small shifts in my assumptions have actually led to some tangible changes in my experiences. It's not always immediate or dramatic, but it's like I'm subtly shifting the odds in my favor by expecting more positive outcomes.
Right. It's about setting that intention. It makes me think about that incredible Tesla quote. Reality does not impose itself upon you. You impose yourself upon reality.
Yeah.
It's just this powerful reminder that we're not just pawns in some cosmic game.
Right.
We're active players, co-creating our reality with every thought, every belief, every action.
That's it. And that actually brings me to a final thought I'd like to leave our listeners with.
Okay, go for it.
What if the most important exploration we ever embark on is the exploration of our own minds? What if the greatest discovery we ever make is the discovery of our own inherent power to shape reality?
Looks like a challenge, right?
It is.
An invitation to step into our full potential as conscious creators.
I love that.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up another deep dive.
It has been a fascinating exploration.
Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the mind-bending world of, Nikola Tesla and the power of assumptions. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep shaping the reality that you desire.